The moment their hands touched, it happened.
Get away from this child right now.
Just as she shouted those words, my mother-in-law, Rose, stared at her grandson as if she were looking at something horrifying. My son Kyle is 5 years old, and that was his first time meeting her. As if an electric shock had passed through her, Rose quickly pulled her hand away. Neither my husband Keith nor I had any idea what was happening. What could she mean by get away from Kyle? Meeting for the first time, why would she make such a remark? I even thought that was cruel. Keith, trying his best to stay calm, asked her what was going on.
Mom, what's wrong? Did Kyle do something?
Don't you two feel anything?
Rose said so, ignoring our confusion. What on earth was she talking about? After letting out a short sigh, she said,
Listen. This child is being targeted by a strong malice right now.
Strong malice? Keith and I looked at each other. Who could possibly be harboring such malice?
I can't think of anyone.
As I mulled that over, Keith suddenly stood up from his seat. After a short while, he returned with a laptop in hand.
Could it be this person?
He opened the laptop in front of Rose and pulled up one of the videos. She stared intently at the screen. I thought there was no way she could figure anything out from such a thing, but then her eyes widened in shock.
It's this person. This is the source of the malice. There's no doubt about it.
Then Rose began muttering something that seemed weird. My name is Cameron Summers. Keith and I run a bakery together, and we are busy today as always. Our mornings start early, preparing sandwiches, arranging freshly baked bread, and giving the storefront a quick cleaning before opening. When the time comes, customers arrive to buy our freshly baked bread. We enjoy light-hearted conversations with them, recommending seasonal specialty bread, and their faces brighten with,
That looks delicious.
We've gained many regular customers over time, and talking to them brings me joy. In fact, I was once just a customer who frequented this bakery. The more I visited, the more I fell in love with the bread, and with the owner Keith as well. That's how our relationship started, and we eventually decided to get married. When we were preparing for marriage, he said,
Actually, I've been divorced before. My ex-wife and I separated when I quit my corporate job and started this bakery.
His manner of speaking, as though each word was being forced out, conveyed to me the pain of the memory.
She said she didn't want to deal with the financial instability, but I chose to pursue my dream of owning my own bakery. That's the kind of person I am.
He added. He also warned me that he might prioritize the bakery over family in the future, and that he might not be able to help much with raising children. After much discussion and consideration, we decided to face that together, despite everything.
Don't worry. Things will work out, and I'll figure it out.
I took his hand and smiled. After that, we visited Rose to tell her about our engagement, and we registered our marriage. Both Keith and I were filled with happiness, strongly confident that we could overcome anything that would come our way. Despite being elderly, Rose lived alone in the countryside, far from our home. According to Keith, she has a strong spiritual sensitivity, and being around too many people drains her energy. I don't sense anything like spirits or the supernatural, so I can't quite understand it. Rose once said,
Sometimes it's a blessing not to feel such things.
Because of that, she preferred living surrounded by nature, and Keith and I respected her wishes.
My body may not be around you, but my heart is always watching over you.
That was Rose's favorite saying. While I thought that was a strange phrase, it somehow felt reassuring and dependable. A year after our marriage, we were blessed with a baby boy. We named him Kyle. Watching our son grow every day brought us immense joy. Even the slightest changes of him felt so precious that I almost wanted to capture everything in photos. Though there was a tinge of sadness as he slowly became more independent, I knew he would continue growing like that. By the time he turned 5, Kyle had become quite the talkative child. However, every now and then, he would say peculiar things. For example, he would happily wave at passers-by, exclaiming,
"Bye-bye."
or he might say something weird to the people he met in the park.
"Hey, someone's riding on you."
That person frequently walked his dog in the park, and naturally, nobody was riding on them, not on the dog as well. Another time, at the supermarket checkout, Kyle asked the cashier,
"Who's on your back?"
His innocent smile made the situation even more awkward, causing the cashier to look uncomfortable and puzzled. When I told Keith about that, he was shocked.
Maybe Kyle inherited mom's gift.
You mean it skipped a generation?
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't let him talk too much in public.
While it was impossible to monitor him constantly at kindergarten, we started making sure Kyle would zip his lips as much as possible when we went out. Yet, we could not expect that much since he was only 5. Even though he's my child, there's something mysteriously otherworldly about him.
If Kyle really inherited your mom's gift, maybe we should get some advice from her.
So far, Rose and Kyle had never met in person. When Kyle was born, there was a severe infectious disease spreading across the country, which made visiting impossible. As the situation had calmed down significantly, I began thinking of consulting Rose. Around the same time I was grappling with Kyle's strange remarks, Keith's bakery began experiencing some changes. It wasn't that sales were booming or that the shop was gaining media attention. Rather, it was something sad. Negative comments started appearing on social media. For example, the bread is soggy, the sandwich smells, the owner has a bad attitude, and so on. Those remarks left Keith deeply troubled.
I always serve freshly baked bread. Why would they say that? Was I really that rude?
He vented his frustrations over a cold beer at night. Whether related to those posts or not, there seemed to be a decline in the number of customers visiting the bakery. Of course, we have been using social media to post seasonal bread specials and announce promotions. Thanks to that, some customers had been visiting the store after seeing those posts, leading to a gradual increase in the number of customers. Yet, in the golden age of social media, customers may choose not to patronize a store based entirely on those negative remarks. I didn't think we'd lose all our customers immediately, but it was clear that things wouldn't improve if that continued. We desperately wanted to turn the situation around. One day, as I was sweeping in front of the bakery and getting ready to open, I noticed a garbage bag left on the ground.
What's this?
Hoping it wasn't anything dangerous like drugs or poison, I cautiously peeked inside. It turned out to be kitchen waste. That looked like an ordinary bag of household trash. I wondered why that was dumped there. Who would do such a thing?
Cameron, what's wrong? Did something happen?
Keith came over, noticing me frozen in front of the store. When I told him someone had dumped a bag of trash, he frowned for a moment. However, he quickly laughed and said,
Don't worry about it. It's probably just a mistake. This is how you deal with stuff like this.
He tossed the bag into the industrial dumpster behind the store. Should I not be worried, as he said? As I stared at the quiet dumpster, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. A week later, more trash appeared. This time, there were 3 bags, and the smell was unbearable. Even Keith furrowed his brow at that. As he threw the 3 garbage bags into the dumpster out back, he muttered,
Our store isn't a dump.
The trash dumping continued sporadically, and we were getting fed up. Around that time, Kyle started experiencing strange events. He suddenly began crying at night or trembling with fear for no apparent reason.
Mommy, I'm scared.
He woke up in the middle of the night, came to me, and started crying. That had never happened before. What was going on?
Did you have a scary dream?
I asked, but he just shook his head and buried his face, softly sobbing.
Go away. Please go away.
Both Keith and I stayed by Kyle's side until he fell asleep. That night, after Kyle went to bed, Keith was deep in thought and sipped his beer. He said quietly,
If this keeps happening, we should file a report with the police.
About the trash?
However, the trash had already been thrown away, and nobody had seen the culprit dumping that. There was also the question of whether the police would even act on such a report. After discussing that, we decided to install a small security camera outside the store to monitor the situation. Around that time, it seemed that the slander on social media may caused a noticeable decline in the number of customers. Sales were sluggish, and Keith seemed deeply troubled. How could I encourage him when he was feeling so down? The only solace was that our regular customers still believed in us.
Let's focus on the people who support us, rather than those who attack us.
Tamarin.
Your bread is the best in the world, isn't it?
I patted his shoulder, urging him to regain his confidence.
You're right. All right, let's try some new menu ideas.
As if his earlier gloom was a lie, Keith began enthusiastically brainstorming ideas for bread. His eyes sparkled like a child working on a craft project. I loved seeing that look on his face. Back when we first met, he would talk about all kinds of bread ideas during our dates. With a sense of nostalgia, the dining table became covered in scattered notes filled with ideas. Just as we were trying to move forward, something happened that felt like mockery. A week later, graffiti appeared on the wall of the bakery. That was a cartoon character I'd seen somewhere before, and next to that, someone had written, "Terrible bread." To make matters worse, that was painted with spray paint, making it hard to remove. People passing by looked shocked and seemed dismayed. The bakery is on a busy street during the day, but at night, there's hardly any foot traffic. As a result, no one had seen the culprit behind the graffiti. Keith was silent, his face tense. His fists were clenched tightly, his frustration evident. I felt a mix of anger and helplessness as well.
No matter how much someone dislikes my bread, there are lines you just don't cross.
Although the security camera caught a shadowy figure, it was too dark, and the angle made it hard to make out the face. Keith decided to file a report with the police and have them investigate. He was determined not to let the culprit escape once he discovered the identity. Strangely, after that, the garbage dumping and graffiti incidents stopped. Perhaps the culprit noticed the security camera while painting the graffiti. If so, it's likely the same person was responsible for the earlier trash incidents. While the harassment outside had stopped, the slanderous posts online continued. A little while later, on a day when the bakery was closed, Keith received a call from Rose.
Hello? The shop is closed today, right?
Yes, it is. What's up?
I've been worried about you too. Would it be okay if I came to visit?
Wait, are you coming now?
Both Keith and I were surprised. That was the first time Rose had ever expressed a desire to visit us on her own.
I just feel inexplicably worried.
Though her reasoning was cryptic, we had no reason to refuse. When we said that, she came all the way to see us. Rose arrived around 3 p.m., and Keith and I greeted her with smiles. She held a box of sweets as a gift, beaming as she stood there. This was the first time Rose and Kyle were meeting in person. Kyle isn't the shy type, but he fidgeted nervously in front of his grandmother. I wondered if he sensed something. Rose observed her grandson's behavior with a warm smile and said,
Kyle, it's nice to meet you. I'm Rose, your grandma.
Kyle, acting as though a stranger had arrived, hid behind me. He stared intently at her as if trying to gauge her.
This is our first meeting, isn't it? Now, I have a gift for you.
Rose said that as she offered the box of sweets she had been holding.
Here, have some sweets.
Seeing the package labeled chocolate, Kyle's eyes lit up. With a beaming smile, he stretched out his hands. Since we had told Kyle not to talk much in front of others, he had stopped speaking clearly in front of anyone except Keith and me. That habit showed itself, even in front of Rose.
I'm afraid he doesn't really talk yet.
I panicked and quickly said what I usually tell strangers outside. For some reason, I felt embarrassed and apologetic explaining that to her. He's 5 years old and still doesn't talk? What kind of parenting are you doing? I worried that Rose might say something like that. However, she didn't seem bothered and handed a piece of chocolate to Kyle. The moment their hands touched, it happened. As if an electric current had passed through her, Rose quickly pulled her hand back.
Get away from this child right now.
Just as she shouted those words, she stared at Kyle as if she were seeing something horrifying. Naturally, neither Keith nor I had any inkling of what was transpiring. What could she mean by get away from Kyle? Being told something like that didn't feel good, and I even thought that was cruel. Why would she say such a thing? Despite my growing distress, Keith tried to stay calm and asked for an explanation.
Mom, what's wrong? Did Kyle do something?
Don't you two feel anything?
Ignoring our panic, Rose said that. What was she talking about? After observing Kyle, making contact with him, and conversing with him, what could she possibly feel? Of course, we feel joy at his growth and happiness at having him with us. However, it was evident that Rose was alluding to something else. Maybe she was talking about something spiritual, but we had no clue.
You two are truly lucky.
She said so after a short sigh.
Listen to me. This child is being targeted by a strong malice.
Strong malice? Keith and I looked at each other. Who could possibly harbor such malice?
I can't tell for sure, but it's coming from a woman.
I can't think of anyone.
It's like a curse. Are you sure there's no one who comes to mind?
Who could bear such a deep grudge against us? A teacher from kindergarten? A mom friend, or maybe even a customer? I didn't want to believe that. As my thoughts spun in circles, Keith suddenly stood up. After a short while, he returned with a laptop in hand.
Could it be this person?
He opened the laptop in front of Rose and clicked on a file. It contained several clips from the security camera footage. When he played the one showing the person spray painting graffiti, Rose stared intently at the screen. Outside, it was dark, and the person in the footage was wearing black clothing and a black cap, making their outline unclear. The person appeared petite, but that alone didn't confirm it was a woman. I thought there was no way anyone could identify that person from this footage, but Rose's eyes widened sharply.
It's this person. This is the source of the malice. There's no doubt about it.
As I sat there dumbfounded, she began muttering something.
That's right. Isn't this person Michelle?
Michelle, is she?
Keith stared at Rose in disbelief. I wondered who Michelle was.
Michelle is my ex-wife, but why now?
How can you be so sure it's her?
I can feel it from her energy.
It felt like I'd stepped into a scene from a drama. To know something by sensing their energy. That was the kind of thing I never thought I'd hear someone say. I was astonished, my mouth agape. Rose then pulled a small scented pouch from her handbag and handed that to Kyle. That had a faintly sweet fragrance.
This is a charm. It will repel the malice, so keep it with you.
I was skeptical. Could something like this really work? Kyle held the pouch up to eye level and nodded seriously, saying,
Okay.
After that, we caught up with her and enjoyed coffee. Meanwhile, Kyle stayed silent, tightly clutching the pouch. A few days later, the situation took a sudden turn. Not long after Rose's visit, we received a call from the police. The officer handling our case said they had identified the culprit behind the graffiti and the slanderous online posts.
Yes, I see. I understand.
When he hung up, he slumped in his chair and said,
As expected, it was Michelle.
Both Keith and I were shocked. Just as Rose had said, the person in the security footage was indeed Michelle.
Why did she target our shop?
Keith had previously told me that after their divorce, Michelle had remarried another man. Her new husband was from a well-off family and was quite wealthy. Given that, I couldn't understand why she would bear any grudges toward Keith or our bakery.
I don't know either. Anyway, I'll talk with her properly tonight.
Since the call came during the day, we focused on the bakery for the time being. Even while serving customers, I couldn't completely shake off thoughts of Michelle. Could she be trying to tear our family apart? That unsettling thought crossed my mind. At least while interacting with customers, I was able to temporarily forget about her, which was a relief. That evening, after Kyle had gone to bed, Keith sat down with a cold beer and began recounting what the police had told him.
Apparently, Michelle and her husband couldn't have children.
Michelle had cooperated with the police and opened up about her situation. She had undergone fertility treatments, but they hadn't been successful. Her relationship with her in-laws had grown increasingly strained. She had been repeatedly accused by her in-laws, like,
You still don't have a child?
and,
You are a failure as a wife.
which had eroded her confidence. Given those remarks directed at her, she found it impossible to find any peace. Amid all that, she somehow learned that Keith had remarried. Keith speculated that a mutual acquaintance must have told her. It was also likely that this acquaintance had mentioned our son, Kyle, to Michelle. Struggling with her own pain at being unable to have children, she wondered why Keith was that happy. Her resentment grew, leading her to commit acts of harassment.
That's just jealousy.
To think that Michelle would write defamatory posts and vandalize with paint over something so trivial. It was terrifying to imagine someone harboring so much envy and hatred. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for her. Surely, Michelle also wanted to have children and live happily with her partner. It wasn't anyone's fault. Whether or not someone is blessed with children is something only God can decide.
I do feel sorry for Michelle, but we've suffered too.
The costs of removing the graffiti and the damage caused by the defamatory posts were significant. As Keith had declared, he intended to seek proper compensation.
Besides, Kyle must have been scared too.
He added so before downing the rest of his beer in one gulp. That was true. Kyle had been the target of unprovoked malice, even to the point where it felt like a curse. I couldn't forgive that either. If Rose hadn't visited, Kyle might still be too scared to sleep. Thanks to the scented pouch, he was sleeping peacefully, just as he had before. The sweet fragrance seemed to soothe and calm him. My only concern was whether Michelle would retaliate and even curse us again or not. When I consulted Rose, she surprisingly laughed and said,
You don't need to worry about that.
Are you sure? Why not?
If you curse someone, the curse comes back to you many times over.
Rose explained that Michelle would eventually face the consequences of her actions and would no longer target Kyle. I had no experience with such things, so I could only respond weakly.
Oh, I see.
In any case, if Kyle was safe, that was all that mattered. We found a trustworthy attorney and filed a damage claim against Michelle for what she had done. We didn't know how she would react. What if the harassment or defamation got worse? The thought of something more serious than graffiti was terrifying. Despite our concerns, to our surprise, the claim was paid promptly. According to one of Keith's friends, Michelle's husband and his family had paid the amount. Perhaps they were concerned about public perception and wanted to avoid further scandal. Since then, the bakery had not experienced any further harassment or defamatory posts on social media. We finally felt a sense of relief. Not long after, we learned that Michelle and her husband divorced following the incident. It seemed that neither her husband nor his family could tolerate her behavior any longer. They must have been unwilling to forgive her for targeting her ex-husband and his bakery. Soon after, Michelle was hospitalized. Whether it was due to mental health issues or some other illness, we weren't sure. It almost felt as though the curse Rose spoke of had rebounded onto Michelle. The saying "what goes around comes around" seemed fitting. When you harbor resentment toward someone, it eventually comes back to you. Even as someone who can't sense spiritual things, that incident made me believe in it just a little. Therefore, I've learned to listen to Kyle's peculiar comments without confusion or judgment. As for Rose, she ended up moving in with us. Given her age, it was no longer safe for her to live alone. Although she initially hesitated, Keith and I managed to convince her. For the first few days after moving into our home, Rose seemed restless, but within a week, she had settled in.
A bakery, of all places, is a place where so many people gather.
As if she had never expressed doubts about living at the bakery, she now relaxes in the back of the shop. She says,
Everyone here is so kind, and I don't sense any malice.
That's why Rose seems to be living comfortably. Furthermore, she has another hidden talent. She can predict the near future of people or animals she meets. It's something like foresight, and she says it also comes from sensing their energy.
If I focus, I can see it.
She said so, laughing mischievously like a child. When Rose whimsically gave advice to one of our regular customers, it actually came true.
Rose, what exactly did you say to them?
Do you remember the girl, the one in the suit? I told her she'd get a promotion soon, and not to quit her job.
Really?
That regular customer often came to buy sandwiches. She seemed to be in sales, always carrying a bag full of documents, with perfectly manicured nails. However, I'd noticed she had been looking downcast lately. Later, she came bounding over to Rose, a spring in her step. Just as Rose had said, she had gotten a promotion. That wasn't all. To someone who stopped by while walking their dog, Rose said,
Your dog is in pain. Take it to the vet.
Though the owner seemed doubtful, the dog began showing signs of distress the next day, and a visit to the vet revealed a real illness. Both the owner and I were astonished. Incidents like those kept piling up, and Rose quietly became popular as the fortune-telling grandma.
Well, I wouldn't want too many people gathering here. I'll keep it occasional.
As a result, her fortune-telling sessions became an exclusive privilege for our regular customers. Thanks to that, our bakery regained its former popularity. Seasonal menu options were steadily increasing as well. Keith was bringing many of the ideas he had jotted down to life, one after another. Meanwhile, Kyle had regained his energy and was back to being his chatty self. The presence of Rose to play with him was probably a significant factor.
Grandma, there's someone over there.
He would still say so, pointing to an empty spot. Rose always responded to each of his observations. She taught him how to distinguish between living things and those that were not. It felt as though he was gradually learning to control his ability to see things. He no longer pointed at empty spaces in public places. Even the cashier at the supermarket we often visited smiled warmly at him. Seeing Kyle happily chatting with everyone, both Keith and I felt a sense of relief. I hope that this ordinary, peaceful life will continue into the future. I believe that my family can overcome whatever difficulties we may encounter.